Welcome to the Stories Create Moments podcast, the podcast where we talk about how stories and books can help children connect with themselves, their peers, their communities, and the world. Today I am interviewing Matt McMann. Matt McMann is an author for the Monsteria series, but before that, he was a musician. As a professional musician, USA Today bestselling author, and Columbia River Kids' Choice Award nominee, Matt McMann played an NFL stadium, a cruise ship, and the International Twins Convention. Now he writes the kind of spooky mystery adventure books he loved as a kid, including the Monsteria series. He's hiked the Pacific Northwest, cruised Loch Ness, and chased a ghost on a mountain. While he missed Bigfoot and Nessie, he caught the ghost. I feel like we need to hear that story. He enjoys brainstorming new books with his wife, New York Times bestselling author Lisa McMann, viewing his son Killian McMann's artwork, and watching his daughter actor Kennedy McMann on television. Visit him online at mattmcmann.com and follow him on Instagram at Matt_McMann. Welcome, Matt. Thank you for joining our podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, Amber. I really appreciate it.
I'm really looking forward to chatting with you about your books and about some of your travels and how your travels have influenced your writing. Let's start out with, I know you've been writing books for a few years, and I know that you value stories and you value books, you value telling stories. What was an experience or experiences in your life that led to a foundation for a love of stories and books?
That's a great question. I was a scared kid. So I was afraid of almost everything. I was afraid of the dark. I was afraid of bullies. I was afraid of the woods. I was afraid of the basement. But I loved spooky stories. I would read every book I could get my hands on about Bigfoot or the Abominable Snowman or Loch Ness Monster or vampires or werewolves. Because when I would read these spooky stories, it allowed me to experience fear in a safe way, a fun way to kind of acclimate myself to the feeling of fear, desensitize myself to fear a little bit. And then when I saw the characters in these stories that I was reading face their fears, it gave me courage to face my own. So when I was a kid, that really helped. I really found help in books to kind of address my fears. And that was one of the things that really helped me to fall in love with story at an early age. And that's continued throughout my whole life.
I did notice when I read 4 out of 5 of your books recently. One I read a year or two ago, but the other 3 I read the last couple of weeks. And I noticed, and I even felt when I was reading your books, these characters, they have to face their fears in order to get out of the situation that they're in. They have to face them head on. And yes. I think that's a great conversation to have with kids. And it sounds like that was some of your experiences. Do you remember a specific story or book that really impacted you? Or was it just general?
I read so many nonfiction and fiction books about things like Bigfoot and Nessie and Abominable Snowman and that kind of thing. But then actually, I really fell in love with the classics at an early age. The classic spookies, like I really remember reading Dracula and Frankenstein when I was quite young and really being captivated by those books, as well as a plethora of nameless spooky books that were around when I was a kid. And I'm 56, so my elementary school was a long time ago. But I might not remember a bunch of the titles of those short little books that I was reading when I was in elementary school. But I really remember the impact that they had on me. And then as I got a little bit older, a foundational work for me was The Lord of the Rings. So I read The Hobbit and then got into Lord of the Rings, and I must have read that. I can't tell you how many times I read the series. And, while that's definitely classic fantasy genre. It's got some real spooky elements, and it's got creatures and monsters, and definitely has that theme of characters having to face their fears. So, Lord of the Rings, I think, would be definitely something that was very influential to me in both reading and writing.
That's impressive that you've read it several times.
Yeah, it's
That's
a
a
great one.
long series.
It is very long. Yes, you're right.
It is a great one. My oldest loves that series and he's read it once or twice. I was looking at your website and I noticed on your website that you posted a story on there that you had written when you were 12 years old. And I read it and I loved it. And I could see elements of that story in your books that are published now.
That is hilarious. I really, you are being overly kind by saying that you loved that terrible story that I wrote when I was 12. It was my very first spooky short story, and we were given an assignment in class where English teacher passed out a picture of a spooky looking kind of house, and the assignment was just write a short story based on this picture. And so that was my very first spooky short story about these two kids that, dared each other to spend the night in the classic haunted house at the end of the street. And it ended very badly and very gorily, especially for a 12-year-old to write. But I appreciate the fact that you took the time to read it and thought that there was any merit to it because it was pretty rough.
I think it's so fun for kids to see things that authors or their teachers or their parents wrote when they were their age. And I just think that's really fun. So I'm glad you posted that.
Oh, thank you.
How did your experiences when you were growing up, reading these books and connecting with learning to overcome your fears and connecting with yourself in the world that way, how did all of that influence you to become an author and the type of storytelling that you did? You've already kind of talked about how when you were young, you were scared of a lot of things, and these stories helped you face your fears. So you wanted to write similar books also to help kids with that. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. I think a formational moment was when I was in seventh grade. We had a creative story contest where everybody in the seventh grade had to write us a short story. And so I wrote my short story and I won the seventh grade creative writing contest. Then eighth grade, we had the contest again and I won again. And my English teacher in eighth grade read the introduction of my story out loud to the class. And he said if the rest of the story had been as good as the beginning of the story, which it totally was not, he'd suggest it be published. And I thought, wow, writing stories is really fun, and my teacher thinks I'm good at it. When I grow up, I want to be an author. And authors have been so influential to me as a young reader, and the idea that maybe someday something that I write could be read by other people and impact them in the way that these authors have impacted me. I was really captivated by that idea. But then in high school, I got really into music. I studied music in college and I went on to become a professional musician for 26 years. But then after I burned out on the music thing, my wife Lisa, who is an amazing author, 33 books, her best known work is the Unwanted series, a middle grade fantasy series. She said, "Hey, you used to like to write stories. What do you think about writing books?" And I thought, oh, that sounds really good, but what kind of books would I even want to write? And that's when I remembered those spooky monster mystery type books that I read when I was younger. And I thought, yeah, those are the kind of books that I want to write because I want to give readers today that same spooky fun and that same courage that I found in those kind of books. So I wrote my very first book and I worked really hard on it and I thought it was great and it got rejected everywhere, never published. I wrote my second book, worked hard on it, thought it was great. It got rejected everywhere, never published. My third book got rejected, never published. My fourth, well, it was at that point when I was feeling very despondent and feeling like I'm never going to make it and break in as an author, that my wife Lisa was reading an article out loud to me and she mispronounced the word mysterious and said monsterious instead. And I made the joke. I was like, oh, that would be a great middle grade book title. And she went, no, it's a whole series and you should write it. And I went, Monsterious. Monsters, mysteries, Monsterious. Stick them together. I love those things. I love monsters. I love mysteries. I'm going to try to write a spooky middle grade series called Monsterious. And so I did. I wrote the first book, wrote up some ideas for some other possible things in the series, sent it to my agent, and he sent it out, and it sold instantly in a 4 book deal to Penguin Random House. So that's kind of how those early influences and those early experiences that I had as a kid found their way into my story and my journey of becoming a published author.
That's amazing. That's amazing that that's how the name of the series came about. And I think Lisa was so smart to say no, not a book, a series, and
She's pretty
give a bigger
smart.
vision to the project.
Yes, she's very
Yeah, that's
smart.
amazing. That gave me chills when you were telling the story. You and Lisa have been traveling a lot the past what, year?
14
Year and a
months since
half?
we became nomadic.
Okay. How have your travels changed you as an author or deepened your storytelling?
That's a great question. I'm very influenced by settings. So, a little bit of context for the Monsteria series. The Monsteria series is a spooky middle grade monster mystery series. The books are short, you can read them in any order. They're great for fans of like Goosebumps or Five Nights at Freddy's or Stranger Things. Anybody that loves, they're geared towards 8 to 12 year olds, but they're really good for anyone who loves a fast paced, spooky thriller with lots of action, a little bit of humor, a little bit of heart. So that's a little bit about the context of the series. What's been interesting to me, even in the course of writing them, was as I tried to come up with ideas for the series because I had the idea for the books in the series because I had a series idea without any book ideas is kind of how it started, which is usually backwards from how it normally is. I found myself being very influenced by settings. So, for example, 4 out of the 5 Monsterius books, the inspiration for the book was purely a setting. For example, Escape from Grimstone Manor, technically the first book in the series. I was thinking about ideas for the Monsteria series, and I stumbled across a photo of a gargoyle statue in front of a roller coaster, and it turned out to be an advertisement
Oh.
for a spooky amusement park ride. And I thought, oh, that would be a cool setting for a Monsterius book, a haunted house amusement park ride. So I wrote a book where 3 friends are trapped overnight inside a haunted house amusement park ride and discover the monsters are real. And that became Escape from Grimstone Manor. And then I was hiking in Vancouver once when we were up visiting where my daughter was filming a TV show. She was actually filming Nancy Drew on the CW network. She played Nancy Drew on that series. And so she was filming up in Vancouver. We were visiting her. I was hiking at this forest in Vancouver, and it kind of was really creepy. It had strange root structures and these weird stones tucked up underneath trees. And I'm hiking through this forest and going, this would be a cool setting for a Monsterius book. And so I wrote a story about 5 hikers lost in a remote wilderness who were stalked by a monster. And that became Terror in Shadow Canyon, the 3rd book in the series. I read an article on a spooky museum in Paris that had a lot of taxidermy creatures. And I thought, oh, that'd be a great setting for a Monsterius book. And that became The Beast of Skull Rock, where a brother and sister try to save their grandfather's spooky museum from a rampaging were hyena. I remembered a field trip that I took with my daughter when she was in 5th grade to a scientific research facility in a biodome. And again, remembering all these years later, remembering that place, remembering that school visit, I thought, oh, that would be a good setting for a Monsterius book. And so I wrote a story called Trapped in the Horror Dome about a 7th grade field trip to a scientific research facility in a biodome that turned into a nightmare when a terrifying monster escapes from a secret lab. So you can see settings have been super influential in my writing. And so now that we're traveling all over the world, about 14 months ago, we decided to sell everything. We sold our home, we sold most of our possessions, and now we live nomadically in hotels and Airbnbs and cruise ships and pet sitting and with friends and family all over the world. And so now, as we travel to these different countries all over the world and visit all these different locations, they're really inspiring to me. We were just in Greenland, and I was, hiking to this really picturesque mountain, and I was in Iceland, and I was hiking to this waterfall, and I was in the Orkney Islands of Scotland, and hiked back to this Neolithic burial chamber, and all of these unique settings that I was seeing all over the world has been really inspiring for me as a writer. In addition to that, I'm meeting people from all over the world. And so you're meeting people from all these unique backgrounds and have these unique cultures and different ways of speaking, different ways of dress. And they're like becoming characters in my head as I'm interacting with these people. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you would be an amazing character in one of my books. So that's just a little bit of how, travel kind of broadens your horizons, puts me in really unique settings, helps me to meet really interesting people, and that can be really inspiring for me as a writer.
I love that setting. Your books start with setting a lot of
Hmm.
times, and it is very strong. I've read 4 out of your 5 books, and it is very strong in your books. Actually, my favorite book was The Terror in Shadow Canyon with the spiders.
Excellent.
I hate spiders.
Me
I hate them.
too. I do too. That book creeped me out to write. It was, yeah, I think that's the scariest one of the series personally.
So now when you hike, are you like thinking what's out there?
Sometimes, yes.
Or were you yeah. There was one picture that you posted on Instagram of maybe it was a cruise ship or a train, I can't remember, and I commented that this would be a great start to a story. I don't know if you remember that, but it looked so dark and narrow,
I'll have to
and it
go
just
back
reminded
and
me of
look. I'll have to
something
go back and look because I
that is
remember us interacting on Instagram for sure. I'm trying to remember. I can't
yeah,
remember
yeah.
what that specific picture I posted was though. Now I'll have to go back and look.
I thought this was a great start to a spooky story. But
I
anyway,
love it.
thank you for sharing that. That's really fun to hear how your stories come about. And actually, I asked my son if there were any questions that he would want to ask you because he loves to read and he's read all your books. And he said, "How does he get inspiration for his stories?" So you answered that question. Another thing I love about your stories, and I really love this, and I noticed this theme through every single one that I've read. Your stories have really strong character arcs with these kids. And a lot of times they start out either they're not confident in themselves or they're scared or sometimes they're too impulsive. And in the spider book, the dad was a little bit impulsive and reckless. And you see this arc through the whole story of them growing and gaining the skills or learning what they need to learn. Can you talk more about that?
Well, thank you for saying that because I consider myself a plot first writer. Some authors are more character first writers. I struggle with characters. Plot comes more naturally and organically to me, but I really struggle with character development. And so that's something I have to be very intentional about in my books. And so that's meaningful that that kind of came across in a positive way for you with in terms of the character growth. I think part of the reason that that happens in my books is one because of that story I told about how influential books were for me and my own growth as a kid. And I still have a very visceral memory of that. So it's something that I try to tap into when I'm creating my characters, especially my kid characters, about those feelings that I had as a kid, those fears that I had as a kid, and those growth barriers that I needed to break through when I was younger. So one of the things that I try to do with my books is to write as realistic a character as I can and allow each character to be flawed. A character that's has really no issues or no growth edges is kind of inauthentic and a little boring typically. So growth edges and growth arcs and having to face fears and conflict are some of the key elements that make a story interesting and make it real. And I think make it helpful for kids. Because my goal with these books is, first of all, I just want to write an entertaining, fun, engaging, spooky story that kids are going to enjoy reading and help them fall in love with reading because I think that's key. If you can get a kid to fall in love with reading. It's going to help them throughout their entire life. But secondly, I want to equip kids with tools that can help them to face the challenges they're going to face in life. And I think an example of that is in Escape from Grimstone Manor, which centers around these three friends who are trapped overnight in this haunted house amusement park ride and discover the monsters are real. And there's layers to the conflict that happens in that story. And one layer is external conflict. So you've got these three friends who are being chased by these monsters, and so it's the three of them having to face the conflict, external conflict of these monsters that are trying to harm them. And then secondly, you've got internal conflict where each character, each of those three friends, has an internal growth edge that they need to address. So Mateo is a really timid kid who needs to learn to overcome some of his fears. Taylor is a really impulsive kid who needs to learn to think before she acts. And Zari is an intelligent kid who hates conflict, and she needs to be willing to speak out and engage in conflict when it's needed and necessary and helpful. So you got the external conflict of the kids versus the monsters. You've got the internal conflict with each kid versus their growth edge. And then you've got the interpersonal conflict between the three characters, where their internal growth edge is negatively impacting the other two in the trio. So Mateo's cowardice has negative consequences to Zari and Taylor, and Taylor's impulsiveness has negative consequences to Zari and Mateo, and Zari's unwillingness to engage in conflict when it's needed has negative impact on Mateo and Taylor. And so I try to write these characters with these growth edges that face these external conflicts, but also have to deal with their internal conflicts, not only for their personal growth, but because of how it impacts their interpersonal relationships. And it's interesting how when you write these stories, one feeds on another, because when they address their internal conflicts in a positive way towards growth, that helps heal their interpersonal conflicts. And then healing of the interpersonal conflicts helps them overcome their external conflicts. So you've kind of got this layering effect of kids facing growth edges that is interesting, it's organic, it helps propel the story forward, and then hopefully provides kids with tools that they can use in their real lives to help their own personal growth and to help face their own fears.
Wow, that's amazing. I love how you described that. When I was reading the books, I noticed that what you're talking about, and having you describe it in those three layers and how it all impacts each other is really helpful to the discussion. I think it's so important for kids to read books where this is obvious, because they're going through that in their own lives. This is so common in middle grade years when they're figuring out who they are and who they want to be, and they're figuring out these interpersonal relationships. And there's always external things they're facing, whether it's in school or with their families or academics or whatever challenges they're facing. Mm-hmm. And these books really provide a springboard for discussion, whether it's from parents or from teachers, to read these books and to talk through some of these things and how the kids can apply the stories to their own lives to learn and grow and talk about, what do I need to learn? You know, what ways do I need to grow, and how is what I'm doing impacting the others? And then also the idea that in these books, they have to work together. There's always more than one character, and they have to work together to solve whatever problem they're facing. And so this idea of teamwork, I really, really loved that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm glad that came through and that it was helpful.
I would recommend to any parent or teacher to read their kids for the fun of it, because your books are fun, and also to open, if they want to use them as a tool to open discussions for those things. That's something I really love about your books.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Have you heard from children or teachers or parents about how your books have what feedback you get from kids?
That's one of the most rewarding parts of being an author is getting to talk with kids, talk with parents, talk with educators, teachers and librarians, booksellers, and hear some of the stories of how something that I wrote um, has been positive and made a positive impact on a kid's life. Obviously, I love hearing directly from kids. Sometimes I'll get emails through my website or whatever, saying, "Oh, I love this book," or I'll be at a book signing and a kid will come through the line and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I love your books. They're my favorite." And it always shocks me, no matter how many times it happens. I'm always shocked to meet a kid that I've never met before who's actually read my book, and I'm like, "You did? How did you? How did you find out about my books? How did you read them? This is fascinating for me." Um, so that's always fun and rewarding. But one of the things that's the most rewarding for me that I've heard, and I've had it happen a number of times because I've done so many school visits. Love doing school visits and talking with kids and getting them excited about books and about reading. And I've done a lot of school visits where I'll be in a city somewhere on tour or whatever, and do multiple school visits throughout the course of a day. Then have an evening book signing event in the town that night. And so many times
Mm.
I've had parents come through the line at a bookstore in an evening event with their kid in tow, with kind of this glazed look in their eye, going, "I don't know what you said to my kid, but your school visit, but they came home telling me we have to go to this book event tonight and buy this book, and my kid doesn't read. I don't know what you did or what you said, but thank you. You got my kid to be excited about reading." And for me, that's been one of the most rewarding experiences. And to hear librarians tell me, "Hey, your books are one of the series that I push on my reluctant readers to try and convince them that stories are fun and they can connect and it's not too hard." And one of the things that we were intentional about, both me and my publisher, Penguin Random House, with these books is we wanted to make them not intimidating to those reluctant readers. We wanted to keep them short. We want, like, intentionally, the fonts are a little bit bigger, the margins are a little wider. So when a kid flips through the book, it's not this dense blocks of text. The chapters are short. Every chapter almost has a cliffhanger ending that propels the kid to want to read the next chapter. So it's been very gratifying because that was an intentional part of the creation process of this series to want to make it appealing to kids that might be a little bit intimidated by reading or haven't found that book that really hooks them yet. That's been really rewarding to hear that that is indeed playing out and that kids are finding the audience. And another thing that kind of happened that I still don't have any idea why or how this happened. I've had four different families contact me or come up to me in bookstores and say, "My child has autism and doesn't read, doesn't connect with books, but for some reason they are obsessed with your Monsteria series. We don't know why, we don't get it, but thank you." So that's been super rewarding for me. And it certainly wasn't something I set out to do. I have no idea why. And obviously, every kid is different on the autism spectrum. Every story is different. But for some reason, apparently, this Monsteria series is connecting with quite a few kids who are on the autism spectrum, which was a really wonderful surprise.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Actually, my 15-year-old just got diagnosed with autism, very high functioning, and he doesn't connect with fictional stories very well. He loves science, but maybe I should have him read your books.
Yep.
Maybe he'll connect with those. But that's really, really interesting. And I find it interesting that, and how did that come about where you and the publisher decided intentionally to make it fun for kids that maybe were reluctant readers? How did that even come into play?
Great question. I think honestly, it came in the inception of, when I got the series idea. So kind of circling back to when Lisa misread and said Monsterius, and that we got this idea for I want to write a spooky middle grade series called Monsterius. That coming up with an idea for a series before you have any ideas for any individual stories is backwards from how it typically happens. Normally, an author will have an idea for a story and they build that story idea of a book, and then they see, oh, this has series potential, or I want to see if I can leave it open for a series potential. In this particular instance, it was backwards. I had an idea for a series that had no stories attached yet. And so it gave me a unique opportunity to choose the type of series that I wanted to write before I started. And so there's three main types of series. There's a dynamic series, a more traditional series, where you've got the same group of characters going through a multi-book story arc, like Lord of the Rings, for example. You've got a static style series where you've got the same group of characters that go through episodic adventures from book to book, like Nancy Drew or Sherlock Holmes. Or you have an anthology style series where the books are connected by a place or an idea or a theme, but each book is an individual story with a unique cast of characters so they can be read in any order, like Goosebumps. And so I decided I think I want to try an anthology style series with Monsterius for a number of reasons. One, because I liked the idea of being able to write about any monster, any kid, anywhere without having to worry about, well, how are they connected and how does this kid keep running into all of these different monsters, and I liked the idea that it gave me a lot of freedom in the storytelling. And because that obviously the thing that you think about when you think about a series, an anthology style spooky series, is the Goosebumps. And so I thought, wow, those Goosebumps books, they're short and they're a good entry point for kids. I think I want to do that. I think I want to approach it in that way. So when I decided to pitch the series and put it together, I wrote one full manuscript, which was actually Escape from Grimstone Manor. I wrote two full outlines for more books in the series. I wrote five other additional ideas, one paragraph each,
Oh.
of that could potentially be part of the series, and then put it all together in a bundle and kind of a pitch package, which is very unique. Usually you're just pitching a single manuscript. So I had a manuscript plus two outlines plus other ideas plus a vision letter for the series, which is a lot of work if it doesn't sell. But I really believed in this idea that I had, this vision that I had for the series as a whole, as this series of short spooky anthology style books that would hopefully connect with reluctant readers. And so that's how I pitched the series. And Penguin really bought into that and they got on board with that. And then as we got deeper in and got to the formatting stage of when books are actually, the editing process is done, and now they're starting to think about, okay, well, how are we going to market this book? How are we going to put this book physically on a page? That's when I approached them and said, hey, I really like this idea of bigger font, bigger margins, helping this to be as least intimidating to a kid as possible. And they were on board, and that's why, part of the reason why it kind of physically looks, the books look the way that they do. So that's a little bit of the behind the scenes about how that came about.
Yeah, these books are very, very digestible. I mean, I sat and read each one of them probably took me about 2.5 hours. They were really fast reads and really fun and really enjoyable. And I think that's perfect for kids who are younger. I think it's so important to encourage kids to read. I was talking to a friend the other day who will be on the podcast. She was a director of a preschool that I taught at when I was in college. And she said, I think we have to teach kids to love reading sometimes. Some kids naturally gravitate towards it. But I think fun books like
Yep.
this are one way to teach them and encourage them to love reading. So I love that that was intentional on your part. And thank you for doing that and contributing to literacy in that way.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You mentioned that you love going into schools and talking to teachers and librarians. You talk to parents at times when they come with their kids to book signings and different things. What would you say, other than what you've already said, to parents and teachers to
Mm.
encourage them to use your books in your class, in their classroom or with their kids? What would you say to them to encourage those connections with their
Mm.
children or students?
I think one of the things that I hear sometimes is, oh, the book, scary books, horror books for kids, that's not good. Their kids are sensitive and, they're young and they shouldn't be reading about those kinds of things. And my response to that is number one, telling the story about how spooky books helped me when I was a kid because I was one of those sensitive, scared kids. And two, I would say to parents and encourage parents and educators who know this, when especially some of them know it intuitively already, and any that have a hesitation about spooky books, though usually when I explain it this way, it helps. We live in a scary world, and unfortunately, that is just true. There are real life scary things out there, and kids are not immune to that. Kids are dealing with things in their lives now that are scary for them. And withholding scary books is not going to shield them from dealing with scary things in their lives. And I feel like giving a kid a book that has spooky themes in it, obviously age appropriate scares, of course, but helping a kid to connect with a book that has spooky themes and that centers around kids like them, their age, who are facing very real external fears and overcoming them, gives kids the tools they need and the confidence they need to think, hey, maybe I can face my real world fears too, just like these characters in the books are facing their fears. So I would want to encourage those parents, those librarians, those teachers to utilize spooky books like Monsterius and a lot of other wonderful books in this genre to help equip their kids to face the real life scares that they're going through personally now and to help equip them for the very real fears that they're going to face in the future. And spooky books are a tool that can help with that.
I agree, and that was very well said. I think it is, like you said, a really good tool to use to help these kids because there are a lot of bad and scary things in the world, and not even bad and not even bad, but just as they are going through different challenges that are new to them, that can feel scary. Going to high school, going to middle school, talking to someone they've never
Absolutely.
met, and, you know, as a side note, when I was reading these books, I started this podcast and there's been times where I have been almost panicked about doing it. And when I was reading those books, I felt that. I thought, no, I have to face it head on. And so I just put myself in the perspective of these kids. I put myself in the perspective of these kids
Yep.
thinking if I'm having that experience, then they will too. So that's a great tool to use in the classroom. We're wrapping up. As a closing thought, this is something that I really value. I know that authors really value, you really value, but what is the value of using stories and books to help kids connect with themselves, their peers, their communities, and the world as they read them?
Such a great question, Amber. I've heard it said, I didn't come up with this, but I love this analogy. I think it's so true that we all, and kids especially, need books that are mirrors and books that are windows. So, a book that is a mirror is a book in which a kid can see themselves reflected. Because we're all different, right? We all have different experiences, different personalities, different appearances, different backgrounds, different cultures. We're all very different, but we all are awesome and wonderful, and we deserve to see ourselves reflected in the pages of the book. And when a kid reads a book, engages with a story, and finds a character that they relate to, that is their same age, maybe is going through their same struggle, maybe looks like them, maybe acts like them, has their same fears, has their same personality. There's a sense of, oh, that's me. And there's a sense of being seen, a sense of being valued, and a sense of being worthwhile. So it's really important for kids to engage with books and stories personally to get that positive reinforcement, that positive validation, that mirroring. Secondly, I think it's really important for kids to engage with books, and all of us really to engage with books and stories, because it's a window into the lives of people who are different than we are, that have those different backgrounds, that have the different culture, have a different language, have a different religion, have a different politics, have a different fill in the blank. Because it's so easy in the absence of understanding to be fearful. So, absence of understanding creates fear, fear creates hatred, hatred creates distance. And there's this sense of othering with people who are different than us that we don't understand. And that creates division and competition and fear and hatred and disharmony and disunity. But a kid can read about characters in a book that are vastly different than them, but see that they are funny and kind, smart, intuitive, interesting, that has some of the same fears and emotions that they have. And suddenly it humanizes people that are different than us and creates empathy and creates understanding and compassion and this sense of unity. Like, oh, this person looks different, acts different, talks different than me, but they have some of the same fears, desires, hopes, dreams, struggles that I have. And suddenly there's a sense of connection and a sense of unity, and empathy is created. And I don't know about you, Amber, but I feel like we're living in a day and age in this country of the United States and around the world where there's a whole lot of division, a whole lot of mistrust, a whole lot of othering, a whole lot of disunity. And we could use all the empathy for other people that we can get. So if we can use story to help reinforce a kid's self-worth and self-identity and help them develop empathy for others in the world that are who are different than them, I think that's a pretty powerful thing and something that we should really embrace when it comes to story.
Wow, what a powerful message, Matt, and very well said. And I don't have anything to add to that. It was very well said, and I completely agree. I love the words you used. Humanizing, it humanizes others, it gives people empathy, and it gives connection and unity. And what a powerful tool and way to use stories and books to connect with others and the world. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
And thank you for coming on the podcast. I've really enjoyed following you for a couple of years and listening to you on other podcasts and reading your books. And it's been really delightful to talk to you today and have you on the podcast. And I'm looking forward to other people hearing your experiences and what you've shared about the value of stories and books, and being able to have access to and read all of your books. I only have 4 here. You've got 5. But thank you again for coming on.
Thank you for having me on the podcast. I had a blast talking to you. I love the focus of your podcast on the importance of story, and I think it's going to help a lot of people. So thanks for what you're doing.